The ill health and death of Queen Anne Stuart. Anne endured persistent health challenges throughout her lifetime, with her health deteriorating notably from her 30s onwards, leading to obesity. Despite experiencing 17 pregnancies, she tragically passed away without any surviving children, marking the end of the House of Stuart's reign with her as its final monarch. Queen Anne's reign was marked by a series of health struggles that ultimately contributed to her untimely demise. Afflicted by recurring bouts of gout, she found herself crippled and reliant on mobility aids such as wheelchairs and a type of enclosed chair with poles that allow it to be carried by 2 or more bearers. Despite her efforts to maintain a semblance of activity, her inactive lifestyle led to a noticeable weight gain, further exacerbating her health concerns. In her later years, Anne's physical deterioration became increasingly pronounced, with her appearance reflecting the toll of her ailments. Tragically, her battle with illness culminated in her passing on the 1st of August 1714, leaving behind a legacy marred by the relentless torment of poor health. Anne's last pregnancy concluded tragically on the 25th of January 1700, resulting in a stillbirth. Throughout her life she endured the sorrow of pregnancy loss and stillbirth, having been pregnant at least 17 times spanning over a decade and suffering over 10 miscarriages or stillborn births. Beginning around 1698, Anne grappled with recurrent episodes of gout, characterized by agonizing pains in her limbs that eventually spread to her stomach and head. Given her history of fetal loss and the manifestation of various physical symptoms, medical experts speculate that Anne might have been afflicted with systematic lupus or antiphospholipid syndrome. Alternatively, pelvic inflammatory disease could provide a plausible explanation for the onset of her symptoms, particularly as they coincided with her penultimate pregnancy. Various other factors have been proposed as potential causes of Anne's pregnancy failures, including listeriosis, diabetes, intrauterine growth retardation, and rhesus incompatibility. However, rhesus incompatibility seems less likely, as it typically worsens with subsequent pregnancies, whereas Anne's only surviving son, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, was born after a series of stillbirths. Syphilis, porphyria, and pelvic deformity have also been considered, but are deemed improbable by experts due to inconsistencies with Anne's medical history and symptoms. Anne also battled with gout, and her battles plagued her throughout her later years, leaving her crippled for extended periods of time. Within the confines of the court, she relied on a chair with 2 poles carried by 2 or more bearers for transportation, or resorted to using a wheelchair to move around. Outside the court on her vast estates, she opted for a 1-horse chassis, which she handled with surprising vigour. The inactive lifestyle enforced by her condition took its toll on Anne's physical appearance, causing her to gain weight significantly. Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, remarked on Anne's transformation, noting that while there remained a semblance of majesty in her appearance, it was overshadowed by a profound sense of gloominess. Sir John Clarke, 1st Baronet, provided a candid depiction of Anne's condition during a visit in 1706. He described her enduring a bout of gout, writhing in extreme pain and agony. His account painted a stark picture of the Queen, with her face bearing redness and spots, accentuated by her dishevelled attire. The affected foot was visibly distressed, wrapped in unsightly bandages. Clarke's encounter left a deep impression, highlighting the distressing reality of Anne's suffering, which resonated deeply with him. Between January and July of 1713, Anne's physical condition deteriorated significantly. The ordeal began during the Christmas season, when she fell ill with a fever and remained unconscious for an extended period of time, sparking widespread rumours of her imminent demise. Although she managed to recover from this episode, her health took another serious turn for the worse in March of the same year. By July, Anne had begun to lose confidence in her trusted adviser, Harley. According to records, she expressed her grievances to the cabinet, citing Harley's alleged neglect of duties, incomprehensible communication, unreliability, and unprofessional conduct, including instances of arriving intoxicated. Consequently, on the 27th of July 1714, amid Parliament's summer recess, she made the decision to dismiss Harley from his position as Lord Treasurer. Despite her declining health, attributed in part to the stress of governance, Anne continued to fulfil her duties, attending late-night cabinet meetings aimed at selecting Harley's successor. However, her condition worsened to the point where she was unable to attend a third crucial meeting due to her illness. On the 30th of July 1714, the anniversary of the death of her beloved son Prince William, Anne suffered a debilitating stroke, rendering her unable to speak. In response, on the advice of the Privy Council, she delegated the duties of Lord Treasurer to Charles Talbot, the first Duke of Shrewsbury. Anne passed away on the morning of the 1st of August 1714, around 7:30 a.m. Her death brought relief to some, including her physician, who saw it as a release from a life marked by poor health and personal tragedy. She was laid to rest beside her husband and children in the Henry VII Chapel on the south aisle of Westminster Abbey on the 24th of August. The death of Sophia Dorothea. Sophia Dorothea, also known as the Duchess of Ahlden, passed away on November 13th, 1726, at the age of 60. Her final years were marked by loneliness and declining health, leading to her death from liver failure caused by gallstones. Her death was announced without ceremony, and despite her royal connections, her burial was delayed and conducted in secret. Sophia Dorothea was born on the 15th of September 1666 and she died in 1726. She was married off to her first cousin George, who would later become King George I of Great Britain. Their marriage, which was set up by her father, his father and his mother, didn't end very well. Sophia Dorothea is famously known for her supposed romantic relationship with Count Philip Christoph, which eventually led to her being locked up in the castle of Ahlden for the last 30 years of her life. George blamed Sophia for abandoning their marriage and demanded a divorce. He had her arrested and kept in a castle during the divorce. On the 28th of December 1694, their marriage was officially ended, and Sophia Dorothea was blamed for leaving her husband. She lost all of her titles and privileges. She was not allowed to remarry or see her children, and she was not even mentioned in church prayers. After their divorce, George sent her to live in Osborne House, which was more like a prison, despite being a large and fancy home. Her ex-husband took control of her property and gave her a yearly allowance for her living expenses. Initially, she got 8,000 thrallers, but this later increased to 28,000. Paid for by both George and her father. She lived in a secure part of the castle, constantly watched by guards. Although her mother could visit her freely, her mail and other visits were heavily monitored. Sophia Dorothea never tried to escape. At first she could only walk in the courtyard by herself, but later on she was allowed to walk in the garden with guards, and after 2 years she could go on short, supervised outings. Sometimes she was moved to other castles due to wars or renovations. Her staff included loyal servants such as 2 ladies-in-waiting, several chambermaids, and kitchen staff. After being locked away, Sophia Dorothea was called the Duchess of Ahlden, and initially she was very passive and accepted her situation. However, as time passed, she tried to get her freedom back. In 1698, after her former father-in-law passed away, she sent a heartfelt letter to her ex-husband, expressing her daily prayers for him and pleading for forgiveness and a chance to see their children again. She also wrote to her former mother-in-law, wishing for a chance to meet her one last time. Sadly, neither responded to her appeals. In 1705, her father wanted to see her one final time on his deathbed. However, his advisor objected, fearing it might upset diplomatic relationships with Hanover. Her father died without them reconciling. During her time in prison, Sophia Dorothea showed her generosity by donating a large amount of money to rebuild the town of Auden after a severe fire in 1715. Her mother's death in 1722 left her completely alone. When her daughter, now the Queen of Prussia, visited Hanover in 1725, Sophia Dorothea dressed carefully and waited by the window every day, hoping to see her daughter, but she never did. Sophia's later years were marred by health problems. She became significantly overweight, and her well-being was frequently undermined by febrile colds that left her shivering and miserable, along with persistent indigestion that made meals a source of discomfort rather than pleasure. Her physical ailments continued to worsen, culminating in early 1726 when she suffered a debilitating stroke. This marked the beginning of a steep decline in her health. By August of that year, Sophia's condition deteriorated further. She was struck by a severe bout of colic, a painful abdominal condition that confined her to her bed. Griped by intense pain, she became increasingly despondent and refused all forms of food and medical treatment. Her refusal to eat or seek help suggested a deep resignation to her fate, perhaps hastened by the cumulative toll of her illnesses and the isolation that she felt in her later years. Her life came to a quiet end just before midnight on the 13th of November, 1726, at the age of 60. Following her death, an autopsy was performed, which revealed the extent of her internal afflictions. The doctors discovered that she had succumbed to liver failure. Additionally, her gallbladder was obstructed, a condition compounded by the presence of 60 gallstones, a staggering number that underscored the severe underlying medical issues that she'd faced. Sophia Dorothea's death was noted with minimal fanfare. Her former husband, from whom she had been estranged for many years, placed a brief announcement in the London Gazette stating that the Duchess of Auden had passed away. Notably, he expressly forbade any public displays of mourning in both London and Hanover, reflecting the continued estrangement and possibly unresolved bitterness between them. His disdain for any form of mourning was further evidenced by his reaction to the news that members of his daughter's court in Berlin had donned black attire in mourning. Reports indicate that he was incensed upon hearing this, although his reasons remain rooted in the complexities of their personal and political histories. In the immediate aftermath of her death, the guards of Auden were tasked with handling her remains. They placed her body in a lead coffin and temporarily stored it in a cellar, a stark and somewhat unbefitting resting place for a woman of her station. The initial plan was for a quiet interment in the local cemetery of Auden. However, this plan was thwarted by weeks of relentless heavy rain that rendered the cemetery inaccessible. As a result, her coffin was returned to the cellar and hastily covered with sand, a provisional measure that underscored the somewhat chaotic and undignified handling of her burial. It was not until May 1727, several months after her death, that conditions finally allowed for Sophia to be buried. The delayed burial took place without any ceremony, quietly, and without mourning typically afforded to individuals of her rank. The austere and almost forgotten conclusion to her life stands in stark contrast to the complexities and intrigues that had marked her earlier years as a consort caught in the turbulent cross-currents of European nobility. Her final resting place, devoid of pomp or significant recognition, perhaps epitomizes the isolation and neglect that she experienced in her final years, far removed from the power and influence that she once defied her life. A heartbreaking tale of Queen Caroline, unraveling the tragic threads of a queen's life and ultimately her demise. In the big storybook of history, some stories make us smile, some bring tears, and others leave us lost in thought. The story of Queen Caroline, who stood by King George II, is one of those tales that touch the heart deeply. Her life journey, marked by struggles and ending in a terrible tragedy in 1737, is a story we need to explore. Join us as we unfold the layers of Queen Caroline's life, her battle with health, and the sad event that led to her untimely end. Picture this: Queen Caroline, the partner of King George II, played a big role during his time as king from 1727 to 1760. Even though her time as queen was cut short, her smart mind and strong character won the trust of scholars and the king. King George II even made her regent, showing just how much he trusted her to run the kingdom. Now let's embark on an in-depth exploration of Queen Caroline's health, a profound journey marked by the joys of indulgence and the agonies of physical ailments. Her love for food, a seemingly innocent pleasure, took a toll on her well-being, casting a shadow over her life. Queen Caroline's fondness for the gastronomic delights was well known, and her expanding waistline attested to this love affair with food. Indulging in rich feasts, she embraced the pleasures of the table, not realizing that this culinary delight would unleash a silent adversary, gout. The painful condition attacked her joints, making every moment a challenge, as if the very act of walking was accompanied by a symphony of pain. Yet the trials of Queen Caroline's health didn't stop there. The tale took a heartbreaking turn with her journey through motherhood. 10 pregnancies and 8 childbirths left an undeniable mark on her body, resulting in the emergence of an umbilical hernia. This wasn't merely a physical burden, it became a source of deep embarrassment for the Queen. The hernia made her appearance, casting a shadow over her regal countenance. In response to the physical and emotional pain, she resorted to concealing this blemish beneath specially tailored garments, weaving a narrative of hidden struggles beneath the veneer of royalty. As the sands of time moved forward, Queen Caroline faced a fateful night in 1737, a night that would etch itself into the pages of tragic history. Attending a party, she was compelled to cut short her enjoyment due to excruciating pain in her belly. The ambience of merriment quickly transformed into a scene of distress. Summoning the best physicians available, Caroline's room became a stage for desperate medical interventions. Bleeding, purging, and a daring operation unfolded, the latter conducted without the solace of sleep medicine. Tragically, the very hands that were meant to heal her committed a risky act, sealing her fate in a cruel twist of destiny. The progression of Caroline's health took a perilous turn, pushing the medical practitioners to explore unconventional measures in a desperate bid to save the Queen. Ignoring established medical wisdom, the doctors, in a daring move, decided to cut a portion of her ailing bowel. The weight of uncertainty hung in the air, yet Queen Caroline, even in the absence of medical aid, clung to her spirit. In the midst of this medical maze, the Queen displayed resilience that bordered on the extraordinary. She exchanged jokes with her attending physician, Dr. Ramby, a gallows humour that testified to her indomitable spirit. However, even the strength of her will couldn't shield her from the gravity of the unfolding tragedy. Despite the facade of humour, Caroline's pain intensified. The ability to ingest even the simplest substance eluded her, and as days turned into weeks, the inevitable transpired. The strained bowels ruptured, causing a burst that heralded 3 long days of unrelenting agony. Finally, on the sombre date of the 20th of November, 1737, Queen Caroline departed this world within the confines of St. James's Palace, London, with her husband, King George II, standing vigil at her bedside. As the curtains closed on this poignant chapter, the tale of Queen Caroline's health emerged as a tapestry woven with threads of indulgence, affliction, and an unyielding spirit that flickered until the last breath. The pages of history bore witness to a queen who faced a multitude of physical trials, each chapter etched with the language of sorrow. Caroline's funeral, held at Westminster Abbey on the 17th of December 1737, was a sad day in royal history. King George II asked Handel to create music for her, called The Ways of Zion de Morn. At her funeral, special seats were set up for important people to watch, something that hadn't happened before. In a touching move, King George II planned for matching coffins with removable sides. He wanted to rest next to his beloved Queen. The sad end of Queen Caroline left a big mark in history, not just for the mistakes in her treatment, but also for changing how royal funerals were done. Her memory lives on, showing how smartness, strength, and life's fragility mix even in the grand world of royalty. Queen Caroline's story unfolds like a powerful chapter in the big book of history, showing us that even queens face tough times. Her cleverness, strength, and courage during her struggles make her a very special figure from the past. As we dig into her story, we get a closer look at the queen who left her mark on history, leaving us with a tale woven in the threads of sadness, complexity, and the strength of the human spirit. The death and funeral of Queen Charlotte. By early 1811, King George was already experiencing vision loss and enduring intense physical suffering from severe ailments, separate from his mental illness. He was confined to a serene and isolated section of Windsor Castle. At first, the Queen would occasionally visit him there, accompanied by one or more of his caretakers or her children. However, his increasingly erratic and peculiar behaviour frightened and saddened her to such extent that she ceased visiting him after the summer of 1812. As her husband descended further into madness, her own demeanour began to change as well. Alongside growing depression, the Queen also underwent frequent and unpredictable mood swings. These ongoing fluctuations in her character strained her relationships with her children, courtiers, and close friends. Gradually, Queen Charlotte started to retreat from public life, dedicating more and more of her time to her country residence, Frogmore House, located on the Windsor Castle grounds. During the later years of her life, she did make a significant effort to mend her relationships with her children, including the Prince of Wales. Regrettably, Queen Charlotte never had a particularly strong bond with her granddaughter, who shared her name, Princess Charlotte of Wales. Princess Charlotte held a deep affection for her grandfather, King George, who had always shown her great kindness. However, her grandmother, Queen Charlotte, consistently presented herself as a cold and strict authority figure, beginning from when the princess was a young girl growing up with largely indifferent parents. Despite the strain in their relationship, Queen Charlotte was overjoyed upon hearing the news of her granddaughter's pregnancy. The Queen understood that the child would secure the throne for her husband's family in the next generation. Therefore, the death of the Princess Charlotte during childbirth in November of 1817 was a tremendous blow to the Queen. Her health noticeably began to decline following the loss of her granddaughter and great-grandson. By the spring of 1818, Queen Charlotte started experiencing sporadic seizures without any clear physical explanation according to her doctors. Having reached the age of 74 that May, she was no longer a young woman and was ultimately diagnosed with dropsy. Her strength began to wane, and by summer, walking became increasingly challenging for the Queen. Her joints often ached severely and her legs frequently swelled. In July of 1818, two of her younger sons, who had recently married German princesses, returned to Britain with their new brides. A double wedding ceremony for the royal couples was scheduled to take place at Windsor Castle later that month. The Queen intended to travel from London to Windsor in order to attend her son's double wedding, with the hope of recovering her health at the country retreat, Frogmore House. Unfortunately, her illness worsened during the journey, rendering her too frail and weak to continue. Consequently, her entourage made a stop at Dutch House, also known as Kew Palace, situated within the grounds of Kew Gardens, allowing the Queen to rest and regain her strength. After a few days, as it became evident that the ailing Queen was not improving, It was decided to hold the weddings for the Duke of Clarence and the Duke of Kent in the drawing room of Dutch House on Saturday the 11th of July 1818. The Prince Regent and several of his siblings attended the ceremony, and Queen Charlotte was carefully carried downstairs and placed in a chair that provided her a view of her sons and brides exchanging vows in English. She managed to greet the members of the intimate wedding party and spent a brief moment with them after the ceremony. However, Queen Charlotte's weakness prevented her from attending the elegant outdoor wedding breakfast held in Kew Gardens. As the wedding party made their way into the gardens, the Queen was carried back upstairs to her bedchamber. The Queen and her retinue remained at Kew Palace throughout the summer. Over the following weeks, the Prince Regent and most of her other children visited her. In August, she was carried out to the gardens in her carriage for a short outing on most days, and everyone hoped that she would soon regain enough strength to continue her journey to Windsor Castle. But she remained too feeble and delicate to be transported. Queen Charlotte received care from Sir Francis Milman and Sir Henry Halford, both of whom were appointed as physicians to the King. They periodically provided updates on the Queen's health during her stay at Kew Palace, bulletins that were issued. The Queen has had several hours of sleep again, but it does not appear to have had any visible impact on her state and Her Majesty's condition. Throughout the rest of the summer and early autumn, the unmarried princesses and most of the princes made multiple visits to Dutch House, hoping to uplift their mother's spirits. It seemed that during these visits the Queen was able to mend her relationships with her children, and even the Prince Regent made several trips to Kew during those weeks to spend time with his mother. There were moments when the Queen seemed to rally, and her family held hope that her health was slowly improving. However, tragically, she developed a severe case of pneumonia, which her weakened state made it difficult to combat. On the morning of Tuesday the 17th of November 1818, the Queen's physicians Milman and Halford issued the following bulletin. The Queen's condition last night was extremely critical and precarious. Her Majesty remains very ill this morning. The same update on the Queen's health was conveyed directly to the royal family, prompting those who could travel to Kew Palace for what they anticipated would be their final visit with their family matriarch. When her family arrived, Queen Charlotte expressed a desire to leave her bed, and her servants carefully carried her to her armchair near the fireplace. Her two eldest sons, the Regent and the Duke of York, were present in her bedchamber that afternoon, accompanied by two of her daughters, Princess Augusta and Princess Mary. They sat together, engaging in quiet conversation for a while, and the Regent sat beside his mother and held her hand. At around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she took a long breath and passed away. The following day, the following statement was released to the public. Her Majesty passed away around 1 o'clock on Tuesday the 17th of November 1818, at the age of 74. Her demise resulted from a gradual accumulation of fluid in her limbs and chest, which no medications could alleviate. Despite a lengthy illness, she faced it with remarkable fortitude and resignation, bringing an end to her life. At the time of her death, Queen Charlotte held the record as Britain's longest-serving royal consort. However, she recently relinquished that title when the current Duke of Edinburgh surpassed her tenure, making her the second longest-serving royal consort. Although her husband, King George III, had been alive during her passing, he suffered from blindness, near-deafness, lameness, dementia, and his ongoing mental illness. It remains uncertain whether he was informed of her death, and even if he had been, his ability to comprehend such news would have been highly unlikely. Several days were devoted to planning the funeral arrangements, and during this period the Queen's body was prepared for burial at Kew Palace, where it lay in state of mourning privately for approximately 2 days. Then, at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning of Wednesday the 2nd of December 1818, the Queen's coffin was draped in a black pall and placed in a hearse drawn by 8 black Hanoverian horses belonging to the Queen herself, for the final journey to Windsor, passing through London. The procession included multiple carriages pulled by black horses, which would carry the Prince Regent and his brothers to the funeral service. Mounted lancers formed an honorary guard accompanying the procession to Frogmore House, the Queen's country retreat. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, upon reaching Frogmore House, the Prince Regent, assuming the role of chief mourner, took his place in the first carriage following the hearse. His brothers then accompanied the other carriages, and the chief servants of the King, Queen, Prince of Wales and the royal family, all attired in deep mourning attire of scarlet livery and black scarves and hatbands, joined the procession, each carrying a lit flambeau. Following them were 40 yeomen of guard, followed by the mounted trumpeters and kettle drummers of the horse guards. On foot, the foot guards marched with their 50s and drums. The death of Caroline of Brunswick. Caroline of Brunswick, also known as Caroline Amelia Elizabeth, lived from the 17th of May 1768 to the 7th of August 1821. She held the titles of Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland and Queen of Hanover from the 29th of January 1820 until her passing in 1821. Caroline was married to King George IV, but their relationship was strained, and they had separated shortly after the birth of their only child, Princess Charlotte. Caroline was originally engaged to her cousin, George, Prince of Wales, whom she had never met prior to their engagement. Despite George's existing illegal marriage to Maria Fitzherbert, he married Caroline in 1795. However, rumours about Caroline having affairs and illegitimate children led to an inquiry into her personal life in 1806, though it was concluded that there was no evidence to support these claims. Despite this, Caroline's access to her daughter remained restricted. Caroline of Brunswick experienced a swift downfall from her once high-standing position. Her erratic behaviour during George's coronation led to a rapid decline in her popularity among the people, who openly mocked and jeered her as she left the coronation venue. However, this marked only the onset of her troubles. So how did this queen die? Caroline's descent into illness marked the onset of a dark chapter in her tumultuous life. Following a harrowing day that left her nerves frayed, she returned home only to find herself succumbing to a grave sickness as twilight enveloped the horizon. Desperate for relief, she turned to remedies like milk of magnesia and drops of laudanum, hoping for respite in slumber. Yet fate seemed intent on thwarting her plans at every turn. As weeks dragged on, Caroline confronted a grim reality. Her health showed no signs of improvement. Instead, it spiraled towards an ominous conclusion. With time slipping through her fingers, she embarked on the sombre task of arranging her affairs, preparing for the inevitable. However, amidst this tortuous journey, she hurled startling accusations into the ether, alleging a sinister plot orchestrated against her. Throughout her ordeal, Caroline adamantly professed suspicions of poisoning, igniting murmurs that pointed accusatory fingers towards none other than King George IV himself. The timing of her affliction seemed too convenient, fueling speculation that it served the monarch's interest to rid himself of his troublesome consort. Nevertheless, historical inquiry has yielded alternative explanations, shrouding the truth in enigma. While Caroline's own physicians diagnosed her with an intestinal obstruction, wreaking havoc upon her body, contemporary experts talk about the possibility of a clandestine battle with cancer. Regardless of the precise nature of her affliction, her demise unfolded as a poignant tragedy, leaving behind a legacy strained with intrigue and sorrow. On a fateful August night, the clocks tolled the hour of 10:25 p.m., marking the untimely passing of Caroline of Brunswick within the confines of her residence. In the twilight of her 53rd year, she departed from this world, leaving behind a legacy packed with scandal and strife, a testament to the tempestuous existence that she led. Yet, even in death, Caroline managed to stir the embers of controversy, ensuring that her name would linger in the annals of history as a provocateur beyond the grave. Caroline of Brunswick, renowned for her penchant for drama, orchestrated a sensational exit that left an undeniable mark on history. Prior to her departure, she meticulously purged her possessions, consigning her memoirs, notebooks, and letters to flames, ensuring that King George IV would never unearth her most guarded secrets to tarnish her reputation. Yet her posthumous manoeuvres surpassed even this audacious act. With a flair for the dramatic, Caroline meticulously choreographed the details of her funeral, leaving behind a final decree that epitomized her defiance. The inscription she prescribed for her tombstone epitomized her unyielding spirit. Here lies Caroline, the injured Queen of England, serving as an enduring reminder of her unwavering resistance against the injustices inflicted upon her by the king. However, her defiance did not cease with her passing. In a final act of rebellion, Caroline incited tumult even in her death. As her funeral procession traversed the streets, ministers of George's regime diverted the route in anticipation of unrest among her mourners. Yet this manoeuvre backfired spectacularly, incensing the crowds further. Street chaos ensued, and enraged commoners pelting the honour guard with projectiles, resulting in the tragic loss of 2 civilian lives. Although unconventional, this tumultuous display of emotion resonated deeply with Caroline's penchant for the dramatic. Caroline's tumultuous saga transcended her era, captivating the imagination of contemporaries and posterity alike. The bitter feud between her and George seized the collective consciousness of the UK, permeating every part of society. William Hazlitt, a prominent critic of the time, remarked on the pervasive influence of their discord, noting its profound impact on the fabric of the nation. Caroline's life, though brief, was a canvas painted with the vibrant hues of drama and intrigue. Her illness marked the final act of a tumultuous existence, where suspicions and accusations intertwined with the harsh realities of mortality. In her passing, she left behind a legacy that transcended the confines of her era, etching her name undeniably into the pages of history as a figure whose enigmatic presence continues to captivate generations to come. The death of Queen Adelaide. In the twilight of her life, Queen Adelaide was besieged by illness that reflected the turbulent times that she lived through. Though she briefly recovered from a serious illness in April 1837, her health troubles continued to shadow her life. Her devoted presence beside her ailing husband, King William IV, until his death in June 1837, exemplified her enduring strength amidst personal suffering. As a Queen Dowager, Adelaide's battle with chronic illness persisted, leading her to frequently move in search of a healthier environment. Despite these efforts, she spent her final years very poorly, her life marked by both the compassion she showed to others and her own physical frailties. In the spring of 1837, Queen Adelaide faced a dire health crisis that nearly claimed her life. At the same time, she was enduring the emotional strain of being with her mother in her final moments in Menningen. Miraculously, she managed to recover from her own illness. However, only a few months later, her husband, King William IV, began to succumb to his own grave health issues. With unwavering dedication, Adelaide spent over 10 days at his side, foregoing sleep and comfort to be with him as he faced his final hours. Her dedication did not wane, even as she grappled with her own frail health. King William IV ultimately passed away from heart failure in the early morning hours of the 20th of June 1837 at Windsor Castle, where he was later buried. This event marked a significant shift in the British monarchy as Victoria was proclaimed Queen. There was a small possibility that Adeline was pregnant, which could have affected the succession, but this turned out to not be the case. Following the king's death, Adelaide became the first Queen Dowager in over a century, a title last held by Catherine of Braganza, Charles II's widow, who died in 1705, and Mary of Modena, the spouse of the deposed James II, who died in 1718. Adelaide outlived her husband by 12 years, navigating life with resilience despite ongoing health challenges. In pursuit of a more suitable climate for her health, Adelaide embarked on a journey to Malta in October 1838 aboard HMS Hastings. The trip included a stop at Gibraltar before settling in Malta for a 3-month stay. Finding no Protestant church on the island, Adelaide funded the construction of St. Paul's Pro-Cathedral in Valletta, demonstrating her commitment to her faith and community even while away from home. Her travels did not end in Malta, and in the summer of 1844 Adelaide returned to her homeland for what would be her last visit. She travelled to Altenstein Palace and again to Menningen, perhaps reconnecting with her roots and family memories. Throughout her life, Adelaide maintained residences at prestigious locations, including Marlborough House, which she held from 1831 until her death in 1849, and Bushey House and its expansive Bushey Park at Hampton Court. These residences served not just as homes, but as places where she could receive guests and conduct her duties as Queen Dowager. Queen Adelaide's later years were marked by a continuous search for comfort and health as she dealt with her ailments. She often moved between various residences, seeking the solace and restoration that each new environment promised. Her life was a testament to her resilience and dedication, both to her personal health and her public responsibilities. Despite the challenges, she remained a figure of strength and compassion, involved in her community and committed to her faith until the end of her days. By 1846, Adelaide moved to Cassiobury House, which she rented from Lord Essex. This period was notable for her hospitality, as she hosted Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, showing her continued involvement in royal duties, despite her health. After 2 years, her quest for a better living situation took her to Bentley Priory in Stanmore, rented from Lord Abercorn, where she would eventually spend her final days. As her health continued to decline, in 1847, Adelaide was advised to spend the winter in Madeira, a place famed for its mild climate. While there, she not only sought recovery but also engaged in philanthropy. She donated money to the local poor and financed the construction of a road, thus contributing to the infrastructure of the island. Despite her failing health, Queen Adelaide made her last public appearance with a significant act of charity and faith. She laid the foundation stone for the Church of St. John in Great Stanmore, also donating the font for the church. After her death, the east window of the church was dedicated to her memory, honouring her contributions. Adelaide passed away on the 2nd of December 1849 during the reign of her niece, Queen Victoria. Her death occurred naturally at Bentley Priory in Middlesex. Due to her humble nature, she had previously penned down her wishes for her funeral during an illness in 1841, requesting a simple and private ceremony, free from any pomp or grand state display. She expressed a desire for peace and modesty, wishing her funeral to reflect the tranquility with which she had hoped to enter the afterlife. Accordingly, she was interred quietly in the royal vault at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, following her own directives for simplicity and humility. This approach to her final farewell reflected her lifelong values of humility and the importance of spiritual over worldly wealth. On the 11th of December 1849, while at Osborne House, Queen Victoria wrote a heartfelt letter to the King of Belgium about the passing of Queen Adelaide. In her letter she said, "I know how you would mourn with us over the death of our beloved Queen Adelaide. We have lost the kindest and dearest of friends, and the universal feeling of sorrow, of regret, and of real appreciation of her character is very touching and gratifying." Through her words, Queen Victoria conveyed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, noting that many people now deeply appreciated Adelaide, perhaps more than they had while she was alive. This sentiment was echoed in an anecdote about an English artist who once painted Adeline. He noticed her eyes were red and asked if the light was hurting her. Adelaide responded that her tears were not because of the light, but because she had cried a lot. This exchange revealed the depth of her unspoken struggles and hinted that she deserved far better than the hardships she faced. Queen Adelaide's life, marred by recurring illness, drew to a close on the 2nd of December 1849. She passed away quietly as she had wished, avoiding the pomp and circumstance typical of royal funerals, in accordance with her instructions for a modest and private burial. Adelaide was laid to rest in the royal vault at St James's Chapel, leaving behind a legacy of benevolence and humility that was only fully appreciated after her demise. Her gentle nature and the challenges she faced in her final years evoke a poignant reflection on the quiet yet profound impact that she had. Her story is a testament to the enduring strength and compassion in the face of unrelenting personal health challenges.
The death of Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, one of the longest reigning monarchs in English history, passed away on the 22nd of January 1901 at the age of 81, after ruling for approximately 64 years. Her reign marked a peak in the prosperity of the British Empire, with her subjects commonly referred to as Victorians. Her death came as a shock to many, as preparations for her state funeral had not been anticipated due to the unprecedented length of her rule. Towards the end of her reign, Queen Victoria faced significant challenges and turmoil. The year 1900 was particularly distressing, marked by the strain of the Boer War and personal tragedies within her family. Her elder son, Edward, the heir apparent, survived an assassination attempt, while her eldest daughter, Vicky, the Dowager Empress of Germany, battled advanced breast cancer. Additionally, her son, Alfred, the Duke of Edinburgh, succumbed to throat cancer, and these losses deeply affected Victoria, who had already experienced bouts of depression, especially after the death of her husband. As Victoria's health declined, she experienced weight loss, decreased appetite, and deteriorating eyesight, eventually becoming wheelchair-bound and confused. Reflecting on her declining health, she expressed sadness and resignation, acknowledging her imminent passing. Queen Victoria, once a formidable ruler of the British Empire, was now facing the end of her reign and her life with a heavy heart. 3 weeks into 1901, Queen Victoria passed away at Osborne House, her residence on the Isle of Wight. Following her death, Osborne House underwent a strict lockdown, with no one allowed to leave the premises for a brief period. Phone lines were disconnected and a crowd gathered outside the gates. A note on the bulletin board announced the Queen's passing at 6:30 p.m, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. The news of her death surprised many, as her reign had been enduring, leaving preparations for her state funeral uncertain. Despite official denials of her illness, Dr. James Reed, who attended to Victoria's health for 2 decades, recognised her impending demise. The cause of Queen Victoria's death has long been debated. While she suffered from rheumatism and poor eyesight, it was a series of strokes after the 17th of January that led to her decline, causing delirium and pain. As her condition worsened, the royal family was summoned to Osborne House, where preparations for her succession were made. Surrounded by her loved ones and clergy, Queen Victoria passed away, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for generations. Prayers and hymns filled the room as Queen Victoria lay on her deathbed, surrounded by her closest family members. Despite her consciousness, her failing eyesight left her unable to see. Each family member kissed her hand and bid their farewells in their own way, while the clerics continued their chants in a futile attempt to rally her. The cause of Victoria's death remains a subject of debate, with some attributing it to a series of strokes that she suffered, while others believe it was simply due to old age and frailty. Regardless, her declining health was evident for some time, marked by her loss of appetite, exhaustion, and confusion. Following her passing, confusion arose regarding the planning of her funeral, as her unprecedented reign left no precedent for such arrangements. Despite her expressed wishes against it, a death mass was ordered by Kaiser Wilhelm, and additionally, logistical mishaps such as the forgetting of a coffin and subsequent delays occurred during the transportation of her body to London. Victoria's body was prepared for burial by her doctor and dresser, who refused embalming and instead used charcoal to mitigate odour and moisture. She was dressed in a white silk gown, adorned with symbolic items, and sentimental objects were placed inside her coffin, including a lock of hair from her close friend John Brown. Her funeral procession, marked by military honours and solemn ceremonies, reflected the magnitude of her reign. Finally, as her body was lowered into the vault at Frogmore, both Kaiser Wilhelm II and Edward VII knelt beside her coffin, paying their respects to the woman who once symbolised immense power, but passed away surrounded by her loved ones.
The death of Queen Alexandra. The final rites for Queen Alexandra, previously known as Princess Alexandra of Denmark, took place on Friday, the 27th of November in 1925 at Westminster Abbey, after her passing on the 20th of November that year. She was the widow of King Edward VII and the mother of King George V. Queen Alexandra retained a youthful appearance even in her later years, but the toll of age became evident during the First World War. Her international travels ceased and her health began a gradual decline. In 1920, she suffered from a burst blood vessel in her eye, resulting in temporary partial blindness. Towards the latter part of her life, her memory and ability to communicate became increasingly affected. On the day prior to her demise, reports emerged that Alexandra experienced a seizure around 11 a.m. As the day progressed on the 20th of November, a gathering of her closest family members, including her 3 daughters, the Queen of Norway, the Princess Royal, and Princess Victoria, along with her grandson Prince Henry, had assembled by 1 p.m, coinciding with her descent into unconsciousness. Observing her deteriorating condition, medical aid was administered in the form of oxygen by 4:15 p.m, although her strength continued to wane. At 5:25 p.m. that very day, at Sandringham House, she passed away from a heart attack, a mere 11 days prior to reaching her 81st birthday. Her son, King George V, her daughter-in-law, Queen Mary, and several other members of the royal family were present during her final moments. Subsequently, her 2 eldest grandsons, the Prince of Wales and the Duke of York, who were en route via train, arrived at 6:45 p.m. Following the announcement of her death, flags across the nation were lowered to half-mast as a sign of respect, except at Windsor Castle, where the Union Jack remained raised, adhering to the royal protocol, which stipulates its descent upon the passing of a reigning sovereign. In a mark of mourning, various entertainment events, including those involving music and dance, were cancelled by numerous West End hotels in London, while the BBC interrupted its usual programming to pay homage to the departed Queen. In a poignant display of national recognition, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin promptly presented a motion of condolence in the House of Commons, a gesture that received heartfelt agreement from the Leader of the Opposition, Ramsay MacDonald. Additionally, the Grenadier Guards marched in the Horse Guards Parade, their colours draped in sombre mourning, symbolising the nation's collective grief and respect for the late Queen Alexandra of Denmark. Following Alexandra's passing, a series of poignant ceremonies unfolded, commencing with her remains being initially placed at St Mary Magdalene Church in Sandringham, before being relocated to the Chapel Royal at St James's Palace. A modest yet heartfelt service was conducted at the church in Sandringham, attended by both the royal family and local villagers. Mourners respectfully paid their final respects by filing past the adorned coffin, veiled in her personal banner at arms. The solemn procession commenced in Sandringham, where her coffin, draped in regal emblems, was conveyed to Wolferton Railway Station. In a sombre yet reverential display, the King, the Queen, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of York, and a host of mourners solemnly followed the cortege, with estate workers and villagers eventually joining this sad march. In London, a grand procession was orchestrated from St James's Palace to Westminster Abbey. The entire route was adorned with military personnel paying their respects, as the gun carriage carrying the coffin traversed key areas like the Mall, Horse Guards Parade, and Whitehall, Detachments from various regiments participated, accompanied by poignant gun salutes. The poignant sight of royalty walking and mourning behind the coffin included the king in a field marshal's uniform, along with the kings of Belgium, Denmark and Norway, the Prince of Wales, the Crown Prince of Norway, and other royal princes. The Queen of Norway, the Queen of Spain, and the royal princesses made their way directly to the abbey. Pallbearers were chosen from the King's Company of Grenadiers. The highly ceremonial funeral took place at the Abbey on the 27th of November 1925 at 11:30 a.m., conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The congregation included cabinet members, diplomats and high commissioners. The order of service comprised poignant selections of hymns such as Now the Labourer's Task is Over and On the Resurrection Morning, and the moving anthem, Give Rest, O Christ. Following the formal funeral service, Alexandra lay in state at the Abbey, permitting the public to pay their respects on the 27th of November. Throughout the nation, additional memorial services were conducted in churches, coinciding with the closure of theatres and dance halls in a show of respect. Beyond the shores, memorial services in Alexandra's honour were also held in Australia at notable cathedrals. Her coffin was later moved to Windsor for a private evening service, joining her late husband's coffin in the Albert Memorial Chapel, where floral tributes were placed for public viewing. As per Alexandra's directives, dating back to 1919, a monument designed by Bertram McKinnell was erected in the South Isle, featuring tomb effigies of both Alexandra and Edward in white marble atop a black and green marble sarcophagus. The bodies of the royal couple were finally interred 2 years after Alexandra's demise on the 22nd of April 1927, fulfilling her long-standing wishes. Remarkably, Alexandra's legacy persisted through her great-granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary of York, who was christened in homage to the late Queen, becoming Queen Elizabeth II, born just 5 months after Alexandra's passing. The death of Queen Mary. The final rites for Queen Mary, previously known as Princess Victoria, Mary of Teck, and the widow of King George V. She died just shy of her 86th birthday, and a mere 10 weeks before her granddaughter Queen Elizabeth II was to be crowned. During her last year, Queen Mary grappled with profound grief following the death of her son, King George VI, the third of her children to pass away before her. Her health had been deteriorating due to a gastric illness, confining her to her bed for about a month prior to her passing. Reports suggested that in her final month, she seemed to come to terms with the reality of her condition, feeling that she had accomplished her goal of safeguarding the monarchy and accepting that her life was reaching its natural conclusion. She also experienced discomfort from the light in her room, leading to the drawing of the curtains to shield her eyes. On the 24th of March 1953, Mary reportedly suffered a hemorrhage, prompting immediate concern for her health condition. At 11:40 a.m., a bulletin released from Marlborough House addressed these concerns. Subsequently, a second bulletin at 1:40 p.m. detailed a significant deterioration in her state, indicating a severe weakening of her heart function. As the day progressed, updates were issued at 7 p.m. It was reported that Mary was gradually losing strength, but peacefully resting. Tragically, she passed away in her sleep at Marlborough House at 10:20 p.m. The official announcement, released at 11:15 p.m., signed by Sir Horace Evans and Lord Webb Johnson, confirmed her passing. Her daughter, the Princess Royal, was by her side during her final moments. Throughout the day, Mary's children and various members of the royal family by her side. The Duke of Windsor, her eldest son, had visited her twice that day and returned to Marlborough House shortly after her passing. Both the Princess Royal and the Duke of Windsor had curtailed their holiday in the United States and the West Indies due to their mother's worsening condition. Her other surviving son, the Duke of Gloucester, her granddaughters Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother,
and additional members of the royal family also paid their respects on her last day. The day following Mary's passing saw a steady stream of royal family members visiting Marlborough House to pay their respects, notably the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, along with a host of other relatives, gathered to honour her memory. In the midst of this, a spokesperson for the Duchess of Windsor, who hadn't accompanied her husband to Britain, expressed her deep distress at the news of Mary's passing. Reactions to Mary's passing were deeply ceremonial and widespread. The banner of her arms, which flew over Marlborough House, was respectfully lowered following the announcement of her death. Across government buildings and warships in the UK and throughout the British Commonwealth, flags were flown at half-mast as a sign of mourning, remaining so after her funeral. At 10:45 p.m, Prime Minister Winston Churchill solemnly informed the House of Commons about her passing. He introduced a motion of condolence, which received support from the Leader of the Opposition. The Federal Parliament of Australia also paid tribute to her legacy. Condolences poured in from various international figures: the King of Sweden, US President, French President, German President, and diplomats from the British Commonwealth, among others. The news of her demise prompted an interruption in the BBC programming at 11:25 p.m. All regular broadcasts were halted, making way for news updates and weather forecasts only. The following day, both courts and the London Stock Exchange held a brief moment of silence before resuming their activities. The royal household observed a month-long mourning period until April the 25th. Official engagements involving the royal family were cancelled during this time. Respecting Mary's passing, although the coronation plans for her granddaughter Queen Elizabeth II proceeded as per Mary's express wishes. The location for her funeral shifted due to the preparations for the upcoming coronation, with Westminster Abbey ruled out as the venue. On the 25th of March, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, a regiment of which Mary was the colonel-in-chief, held a solemn parade dedicated to her memory. The ceremony surrounding Mary's passing continued as her coffin was placed at the Queen's Chapel in Marlborough House grounds on the 26th of March. Members of her household stood guard in vigil over her casket. On the 29th of March, the Archbishop of Canterbury presided over a small service at the chapel, attended by the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen Mother, and other members of the royal family. Floral tributes from close family members adorned the chapel, signifying their deep respect and affection for Mary. A plaque situated in Westminster Hall marked the significant event of her lying in state. The movement of Mary's coffin from Marlborough House to Westminster Hall commenced on the 29th of March at 2:29 p.m, following a route extending a mile and a half. Adorned in her personal standard and topped with a wreath from the Queen, the coffin rested on the gun carriage of the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery. The procession moved from the Mall towards the Horse Guards Parade and into Whitehall, traversing streets filled with an assembly of 500,000 people. The carriage was accompanied by 6 pallbearers, including colonels from the 4 regiments with which Mary held a significant connection. Participating in this grand march were units from various military divisions, numbering 210 members, each from the Royal Air Force and the Brigade of Gurkhas, along with 42 from the Household Cavalry and 262 from the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines. The procession included the massed bands of the Brigade of Gurkhas, 2 footmen, 2 pages, and her steward, all representing Queen Mary's household. The gun carriage, flanked by pallbearers and the Queen's company of the Grenadier Guards, was escorted by notable figures such as the Duke of Edinburgh, the Duke of Windsor, the Duke of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent, Prince George Valdemar of Denmark, members of the British nobility, high-ranking military officers, and representatives from regiments associated with Mary. Throughout the route, military personnel stood in formation with arms reversed, only presenting arms when the gun carriage passed in front of them. The pace of the procession was 80 steps per minute, with gun salutes fired every minute. The entire march lasted 26 minutes, with the coffin arriving at Westminster Hall at 2:55 p.m. At 3 p.m, when the coffin was positioned within Westminster Hall, distinguished members of the royal family, including royal dukes, Mary's brother, grandsons, and other nobility, stood in solemn respect. The Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, the Princess Royal, the Duchesses of Gloucester and Kent, Princess Alexandra, and the Countess of Athlone stood on the opposite side. The Grenadier Guards formed the guard of honour, while regiments from the Royal Air Force also stood present. An intimate service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury took place in the presence of royal family members, government officials, and Parliament members and their spouses. Her remains were placed in state from March the 29th to the 31st, 1953, allowing heads of states and nearly 120,000 mourners to pay their respects as they passed by her coffin. The vigil at her coffin was also shared by the Duke of Windsor and the Duke of Gloucester. On the morning of the 31st of March 1953, Mary's remains were transported by car from London to Windsor at 5 a.m. They were then taken to the Albert Memorial Chapel in preparation for a procession within the grounds of Windsor Castle towards St George's Chapel. Mourners departed from London Paddington Station to board a special train heading to Windsor for the funeral. The coffin, borne by 6 military pallbearers selected from regiments associated with Mary, was brought into St George's Chapel. It was solemnly carried through the Great East Door at 11 a.m. The procession was led by Captain Arthur Paget, Lord Claude Hamilton, the Hon John Coke, who carried Mary's insignia and chivalric orders, and the Lord Chamberlain. Following were a host of notable figures, including the Duke of Edinburgh, the Duke of Windsor, the Duke of Gloucester, and the Duke of Kent. During the funeral service, attended by 1,500 mourners, conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Windsor, hymns like "Abide with Me" and "Glorious Things of These Are Spoken" were sung. The coffin was then lowered to the royal vault as the Queen sprinkled earth from Frogmore 3 times onto her grandmother's coffin, marking the Archbishop's declaration of her transition to eternal life. This was followed by the pronouncement, "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." The service concluded with the recital of Dead March. After the ceremony, members of the public were allowed on the castle grounds to pay their respects and view the floral tributes. Simultaneously, a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral, attended by 4,000 individuals, was held. Mary's body was laid to rest in the royal vault before being interred next to her husband, King George V, in the north nave aisle of St George's Chapel, beneath a significant tomb effigy sculpted by Sir William Reid Dick. In August 1953, it was revealed that through the principal probate registry records that Mary had left an estate valued at £379,864 in her will, later assessed at £406,407.